Happy New Year's everyone, and welcome to the first tutorial in 2017. And actually what you're seeing here is something that we've worked on in the last video of the Advent Calendar series, but many of you wish that we continue working on this project, which is called Present Base. And what we're doing with that is we can save presents that we want to give to several people. We could also use this for Easter or whatever other occasion there might be over the year. And in this video, we're going to focus on creating a real data model to store real data and also to display real data. And what we can do here is click on the plus icon here. And this brings up the image picker and we can select an image. And also we can enter a person's name and the present that we want to give to that person. So I would call the person Dad now, for example, and the present is a book. And once I save that, it's added to our table view and it has the exact design that we have applied in the last video. So check out the last video, that's also linked down below in the info box to get the starter project, and we're going to do all of that using core data. So this is not a introduction into the theory in core data. We're going to create a data model and so on, and we're using, of course, Swift 3. So this is a great chance for everyone who wants to get the basics, really the pure basics of core data in Swift 3. So I have already downloaded the starter project from the last tutorial, which is called Present Base, and I'm going to open the Present Base folder. In the Christmas design folder, you have also the design as a sketch file and so on and all the assets. And here in the Present Base folder, we have our Xcode project. And we have already set up all of the user interface here. And if you want to know more about how to do that, you can learn that in the last tutorial. But we are going to focus on creating a data model now. So we want to use core data, and we haven't added core data ability to this project yet. And core data is a great way to persist data because it's really simple and it's kind of visual to create the data model. And it's also very simple to save data using this data model. And what we want to do now is creating the data model first. So I'm pressing Command N on the keyboard. And in the iOS tab here, if I scroll down to core data, to the core data section, we'll find the data model. And I'm clicking next here and add that to my present base target and create that model. We could also maybe call that present model or something like that. And with that, we have our core data model. And data models are all about entities, fetch requests, relationships, and so on. But we will only focus on creating one single entity here, which is going to be the present. So I've pressed on the plus icon in the lower section here, which gives me one entity, and I'm going to rename that to present. And our present, if we have a look at the user interface, consists of three elements: a background image of the person we want to give our present to, the name, and the present itself. So we need to add those three attributes here, which are going to convert to properties later, because we can work with the entities that we have created, like working with classes, with functions and properties, and the attributes are going to be converted into properties automatically. Earlier, before Swift 3, for example, you had to create so-called NS-managed object subclasses. There's no need for that anymore. We can simply use these entities later in code, and I'm adding my three attributes now. So first of all, I'm going to have a person, which is going to be of type string. I'm going to have an image, which is going to be a binary data type. And you must be careful here, because if images are getting too large, it's no longer efficient to store them directly in core data. In that case, you should just use a URL string, for example, and put that into your database and then access the file, the image file, using that URL. And the last thing that we have is the present name. We could call it that way. And this is also a string. And that is really all we need to do for our data model. It's really simple. We only have those 3 attributes and our one entity. And what we need when we're working with core data is a core data stack. We could write that ourselves, or we can use a template from Xcode. And we get that by creating a new single view application, for example. Doesn't need to be a tvOS, can be a iOS single view application. I click next, give it some kind of a name, hit next again, but make sure to activate use core data here in that section. So we enabled core data, and with that Xcode gives us some template code that we can use. I create that on my desktop, and then we just have a look at the app delegate. And as you can see here, core data is already imported here, but more interestingly is this core data stack, which is a lot smaller in comparison to earlier versions of Xcode and also of Swift. So all we need to do is copy those few lines of code here and hit copy. Then we can close and delete this application and this whole project. And all we want to do here is now paste this core data stack at the bottom of our app delegate file, and then also import core data into our app delegate class. And then if we scroll down again to our core data stack, then you can see that we get 2 things here. First of all, there is a so-called persistent container. And a persistent container is extremely cool because it highly simplifies what you had to do earlier. And it says here in the documentation, this is a container that encapsulates the core data stack in your application. And its persistent container simplifies the creation and management of the core data stack by handling the creation of the managed object model, the persistent store coordinator, and the managed object context. And it also helps us to access the managed object context. And just to give you a quick overview of what that means, we are going to have a look at this little graphic from the Apple documentation. And as you can see, the managed object context is really at the top of the core data stack. And this is our interface between the database, the requests that we send to the database, and the answers that we get from the database as an array. Only so much about the persistent container and so on. The most important thing for us now here is to correct the initialization of the persistent container with the correct name. And what it requests from us is the name of our data model, which is present model, as you can see here in our document or in our project files. So let's just quickly add that here, which is present model. And then we have some error handling here, which you should do more carefully if you have a productive app, of course. And the second function that we have here is a save context function that saves the changes to the database. And one great place to add that is in the application will terminate function, so that all the changes that were applied to the database are automatically saved when you close the app, when you put it in the background, and so on. So we will call self.saveContext right here. And with that, our preparations are actually complete, and we can now start adding more code to our Christmas presents table view controller that we've already created in the last tutorial. So in the last tutorial, we had this My Gifts array with a dictionary with all of the data that we had already created. But now we want, for example, our own images. We want to load images from the photo library of our users. And therefore, we are going to adopt the UI image picker controller delegate. And if we are using an image picker controller, we're also going to need the UI navigation controller delegate. And we want to display the image picker controller when our user presses the plus button. So I am entering my storyboard, bringing up the assistant editor, and scrolling down here a little. And actually we can remove all of this template code here. This makes it a little more easy to read. And then we're pressing Control on the keyboard and drag to our assistant editor, creating a new action for this button. Let's maybe call that add present, and hit connect. And with that, we have our function ready. And what we want to do here is, first of all, create an image picker. And this is really simple. You only need to initialize it with UI image picker controller. And then we can define a source type. So I'm using the image picker using the source type property, and I'm only allowing the photo library. Again, if you're using this in a productive app, then you should also allow the camera and maybe display a action sheet for that. And how to do that, you can learn about that in the 24 days advent calendar that you will also find a link below to the whole playlist, so just in case you want to rewatch some of those videos. And then what we also need to set is the image pickers delegate, which we can use self for because we have adopted the UI image picker controller delegate protocol. So we can also call the functions image picker controller did cancel and image picker controller did finish picking media with info. So these are the two important delegate functions that we have here. And the last thing that we should do here in the add present function is to also display the image picker controller. And we can do that by using self, present, and then we present the image picker animated, and we do not need a completion handler right here. And we can now run the app one time in the simulator, and we should be able to create a crash by pressing on the plus button. So we have our old data in the app, and I press the plus button, and the app crashes because we haven't yet added the NS Photo Library usage description key to our info plist. And if you use the camera, you also have to provide an NS camera or the camera library, no, the camera usage description key. I think it's called that way. But nevertheless, we will open up the info plist, right click in the info plist and add a row here. And I'm just pasting this key here. And this translates into privacy photo library usage. And then as the value, we have to enter a string that is going to be presented to the user to get to know why we're using the photo library, and we're using it to display images of the people you want to give presents to. Or maybe you will think of a better reason why we should be able to access the photo library. So we can run our application now again, and we should be able to press the plus button, and here we go. We get the information that we've just entered into the info plist file. We press OK, and we get to access the photo library. We can choose an image, but nothing happens yet. We can press cancel, and nothing happens yet. So we have to go back into our Christmas presents table view controller, and because it's simpler, let's first of all add some code to the image picker controller did cancel function. Here we simply have to use the picker from the argument list and call the dismiss function. So this is a view controller, and we can dismiss it just as we would with any other view controller. And we want this to be animated, and we do not need a completion. But as for the image picker controller did finish picking media with info, we have to add a little bit of code here. So the two things that we want to do here is, first of all, get the image that the user has selected. The next thing we want to do is to create or to display the alert view where the user can enter the name of the person he wants to give a present to and the name of the present. So that means that the first thing we should do is definitely getting the image. And we're using an if-let statement here to check that we really get an image, and then we use this info object here, which is a dictionary, and we can simply access the original image by using UI image picker controller original image, and then we can convert that to a optional UI image. And with the if-let statement, we make sure that in the image object that we have here, that we can definitely use that in this code block. But what do we actually want to do with that image? We want to display it, of course, but we also want it to be stored in the database, but together with two other pieces of information, the present name and the person name. So what we can do is create a new function that I'm going to call, let's say, create present item, And we're going to associate the present item directly with the image. So I'm adding and with image, and this is going to be a UI image as a parameter so that we can use that later. And we want in this function also to present a alert view to ask the user for the present name and the person name. But the alert view is going to be displayed on the Christmas present table view controller. So actually, let me just close the app for a second and reopen it. This is our Christmas presents table view controller, and we want to display the alert view with the text fields on this view controller. But at the moment, when we did finish picking media with info, we still have the image picker controller open and we can display our alert view here. So what we want to do is actually dismiss our image picker. So I'm calling the picker and the dismiss function because it's an ordinary view controller actually. This can be animated, and the completion handler tells us when this animation is done and when our image picker controller is closed. So what I can do here is call the create present item function with a self in front of it because we're in a closure, and then add our image as a parameter here, and then we can continue working with our image in this create a present item function where a lot of the core data action is going to happen. And the first thing that we want to do here is create a present item that is going to be saved to our database. And now the cool stuff is going to happen. We can simply create a present item or a present object by using a present class, although we have never created that class ourselves. Xcode has automatically created this class for us when we created the present entity. So I want to initialize this present object with a context, a managed object context. And we're going to use this managed object context throughout this class. So it would be a great idea to have this available as a property. But first of all, let's import core data so that we can use core data in this class. And what we also want to do now here is create a managed object, object context, which is going to be an NS managed object context. And we can initialize that in our view.load function by simply using the managed object context and using UI application shared delegate and convert that as app delegate. Then put some parentheses around that, and with that we have access to our app delegate function, and we can simply use now the persistent container property that we have there, and there in the persistent container we have a property called view context, which returns a managed object context. And with that we have initialized our managed object context, and we can use it as a property throughout this class. And here I'm now going to add my present item, present item, using the present class that we haven't created ourselves, using the initializer with the managed object context, and simply pass along the managed object context property that we have just created. And now we can start adding information to our present item like the image. And I'm using my present item now, accessing the image property, and as you can see, this requires an NSData object, and we can simply do that by using NSData, initialize it with a data object, and we can now use UI image JPEG representation, use the image that we have as a parameter here, and I'm using a compression quality of 0.3 to make it a little smaller, our image. And I also have to unwrap that. And with that, I have added my image to my database object. And to continue adding information, we will need the present name and the person name. And therefore, we want to use an alert controller. And since this is pretty standard code, I've already prepared that, and I'm pasting it right here. And you can also watch the video in the Advent Calendar UIKit series from the playlist below to learn more about alert controllers. And as you can see, I've just created an input alert, initialized it with a title and a message. I've added 2 text fields. The first text field has a placeholder of person. The second has a placeholder of present. And then in the save action that I've added to this alert controller, we are just getting the 2 text fields, the person text field and the present text fields, and check if they do have content or not. And only if they are not empty, so if a user has entered a name and the present, then we can continue and adjust our present item. So I'm again using the present item, and we have a person, or let's start with the, we're starting with the person property here. And all we need to do now is using our person text field and its text property to assign that. And the second thing we want to do is using, again, the present item, use the present name and use the present text field and its text property to add that information to our database object. And now we can actually save this information to the database. But before, we did not call save on the managed object context. The information is not yet really persisted in the database. And since this can go wrong, we have to put that into a do try catch block. So what we need to do here is we use try, and then we use our managed object context and simply call the save function. And then we can catch that, a possible error here. We are going to print could not save data, and we could also append the error and its localized description using string interpolation here. And this is how simple you actually save data. And we're only doing this if our users have entered a name and a present into the alert controller. And the last thing we do is adding a cancel button, and then we present the alert controller. And we can actually give this a try right now in the simulator. So let's have a look. And here we go. I'm pressing on the plus button. We can choose an image right here. And once we closed the image picker, we can enter a person. Let's say sister. And the sister gets a cake. And I hit save, and nothing happens. But the app did not crash, which means that everything worked so far, and we can now concentrate on loading that data into our table view controller. And the first thing we want to do is actually add a comment here, because we do no longer need my gifts, this array of dictionaries. Instead, we're going to create a new array that we're going to call presents. And this is going to be an array of present objects, which we are directly initializing here at the top. And then what we also want to do is create a load data function right below view.load, and then we should also call that function directly in view.load. And what we want to do here is actually fetching all the information from the database. We do not want to add any fancy predicates here to get more exact information, only presents we have added in the last week or something. We want to have all of the items in our database. And how can we do that? We create a so-called fetch request. So I'm going to call that present request. And this is going to be an NS fetch request for the type present. And then what I can do is initialize this fetch request using the present class and calling the fetch request function. And with that, we have a fetch request that we could now configure. For example, we could use that fetch request and add some predicates or sort descriptors, but we don't want to do all of that right now. All we actually want to do now is saving all of the results from the database into our presents array. And we again have to do that in a do try catch block. So what I want to do is do the following. I want to take my presents array, and I want to try using my managed object context and fetch information from the database using my present request. And if this works, that's fine. And if not, what we want to do is catch, of course, the error, and we are printing could not load data from database. And again, we're using the error and its localized description to get more information on the problem using string interpolation right here. And after we have loaded the information into our array, what we also want to do is using our table view and reload the data. But since we have not configured our table view to work with our presence from the database yet, we have to do that really quickly. And what we have to do first is to change the number of rows in section function here and no longer return my gifts.count, but the presence array and its count property. And the next step should be to make the necessary changes in self_row at index path, because we no longer use the mygifts array with its dictionaries. We can completely remove that line and maybe change it to present item. But the way we get the information is actually pretty similar. We're using our presence array and accessing the correct piece of information by using indexPath.row. And with that, we are always getting the correct item from the database corresponding with the correct row in our table view. And the next interesting piece of information that we're adding to our cell is the image itself. And first of all, we should check if the image is available with an if-let statement. We're calling it present image maybe. And here we can directly assign a UI image initialized with a data object. Since we're getting a NSData object from the database, we have to convert that. So I'm using the present item and its image property and simply cast that to a data object. And in this if-let statement, in this code block, we can be sure that we have an image available. So I'm simply removing or cutting this line of code here, pasting it into our if-let statement, and instead of the initialization here, I'm simply assigning a present item to our cell's background image view. And the let's of course not use the present item, but the present image. And the last two pieces of information, the name label and item label, these are really simple. We just use our present item for that, and here we use the person object or the person property, and here we use the present item and the present name for the item label. And actually, that's all there is to it, but we should not forget to add one last piece of code right here when we have saved our managed object context. When we've created a new present item, we should also make sure to call self load data. And now we can build our application. We can also run our application. And here we have it. This is the first item we created earlier when we could not yet display the information for our sister with the cake. And let's hit another time the plus button, this time selecting a different image. And maybe this is a present for my brother and he gets a book. And if I hit save, we directly get our new element here with the correct image and with the brother and the book. And if we now close the application again and run it, again, we should still be able to see both of our items because they're persisted in the database. And indeed, here they are. This is now a very brief introduction into core data. There are a lot of more possibilities, but as you wished, I wanted to give you a little deeper experience with this application so that it's getting a little more real and that you also get some experience with core data and Swift 3 and all the new possibilities. And we also have no great user interface. So if you want, what you can do is create a cool design for this adding a present experience, create that design in Sketch, Photoshop, whatever, and add that mockup as a link in the video below or as a comment below. And then in one of the next videos, we can try to convert that design or one or two of those designs into code and using Xcode to do that. If you want this, just create such a design, paste it as a mockup in the comments below. I thank you so much for watching, and I see you next week.